I've always thought that the night has a unique power. It's a time when the lines separating the ordinary from the extraordinary are blurred, and reality and the unknown coexist. Ever pondered what may occur if you happen to run into a passenger who wasn't from this world on any particular night? I want to tell you that story, which started while I worked the midnight shift as a cab driver on a chilly night. The fog of dawn seemed to hold secrets that should never be exposed, despite the dazzling city lights. A shiver went down my spine as I inserted the key into my taxi's ignition. The road's loneliness and the eerie silence that followed it were getting familiar to me, even though I had driven through those hours numerous times before. But that night would be different. At an empty corner, I picked up my first passenger, a tired-looking man with a hat that covered part of his face. He gave me the address, the old cemetery on the outskirts of town, without uttering a word. I thought it was just another path, but there was something about the air that made me shudder. The man did not flinch as I drove. Before I could respond, the passenger disappeared from the back seat as the atmosphere abruptly changed and the taxi filled with the smell of damp earth. To my astonishment, there was nobody there when I looked in the rearview mirror. Instead, the air was filled with the potent, piercing smell of fresh, loamy earth. My heart raced wildly, and even though I tried to make sense of what had happened, a tangible presence seemed to fill the void. After dropping the stranger off, I went back to the road. But as the hours went by, the same thing kept happening. New passengers kept coming in, all asking for the same place. And when they got to the cemetery, they all vanished as soon as the smell of earth and dampness filled the taxi. With every encounter, I felt the mystery get closer than ever in the darkness. And the cemetery with its weathered gravestones and trees that whispered secrets seemed to be closer than ever before. As I drove, I started to feel uneasy and wondered how many of those individuals had come there with no apparent reason and why they had picked that location out of all the ones in the city. As the shadows moved around me, I made the decision to solve the riddle because there was more to this story, like a thread woven through time, and it drew me in. The night closed in on me behind these lost individuals, and the engine screamed like a reflection of my mounting fear. My interest got deeper with every lost passenger, drawing me closer to the secret that lies behind those souls like a magnet. The next passenger I picked up was a young woman who exuded a depressing vibe. She took a seat in the back and gave me the same address once more. I felt a connection to her as I drove towards the cemetery, as though I could see the sorrow of the world mirrored in her eyes. The air got thicker when we got there. I was about to ask her whether she was certain she wanted to get out, when the taxi filled with the smell of damp earth. The woman, who seemed to be able to see straight through a veil, suddenly grinned and met my eyes. "Don't be afraid," she whispered quietly. "We're just going through." As I observed her gradually fading away, the sentence rang in my head. I was unable to comprehend what was taking place. Really, who were they? What made them decide to go back there? The cemetery became their home, and it seemed like an eternal loop, a return to eternity. The story became darker and more interesting with each passenger. My determination to find answers grew. When my shift was finished, I went back to the cemetery. The fog was still thick and the silence was deafening. I started to roam among the graves, looking through the tombstone inscriptions for answers. The shadows seemed to be observing me. I paused in front of one that appeared to be older than the others. It was the tomb of William Baker, a man who had passed away inexplicably. I questioned whether there was any relationship to the passengers, given the paucity of information regarding his life. A chilly breeze blew through me abruptly as I was lifting it up. As though the cemetery itself were trying to tell me something, the ground shook a little underfoot. In front of William's tomb, I recognized that all of my passengers shared a terrible fate that bound them to this world. That night, the wind howled, and every whisper appeared to convey the voice of those who had not found rest. Questions were racing through my head. Did they seek retribution for some unspoken wrong, or were they looking for something they had left behind? I started to feel as though I was becoming a part of this story, and the sense of being caught between two worlds grew stronger. The mystery of the night enveloped me and further ensnared me. Their desire to comprehend their suffering and the reason they continued to be caught in this cycle of fading away turned into an obsession. My night shifts were increasingly loaded with amazing experiences as the weeks passed. I went back to the cemetery to look for the souls who had come for assistance. And with every visit and tale I learned, I felt closer to them. They were no longer merely ghosts, but rather people with towels pleading to be heard. I was waiting at a corner one night when a car rushed by, illuminating me with a brilliant light. As the light dimmed, I noticed a familiar figure, the elderly man, approaching my racing heart. The old man replied, "Not all who come here are lost. Some seek justice and others redemption." As he talked, the air became dense with a profound silence. This presence was more obvious than ever, and this time he wasn't alone. Other passengers surrounding me as if they had chosen to expose themselves. As if the cemetery itself were awakening, I sensed the energy in the taxi rising as the group of spirits started to recount their memories, each one more heartbreaking than the one before. Stories of unmet promises, betrayal, and lost love. For hours, the experience was intense. I was surrounded by tragic characters who revealed their darkest secrets, giving me the impression that I was in the heart of a story. I realized that my goal was to assist them in obtaining the resolution they so sorely desired. I transformed my vehicle into a haven for people who were voiceless. I made notes and looked into the lives of those who went missing in an effort to unravel the riddles behind their disappearance. There were answers at points, and at other moments I just let the story's momentum carry me along. But I started to feel the weight of those stories. My life changed completely when I realized that I couldn't bear the pain any longer. One night, while I was in the cemetery, I made a promise to the souls that I would help them find the peace they so desperately sought. From that point on, every morning the dawn still reminded me of the chaotic and hopeless nights. But it also reminded me that every time someone got into my taxi, I knew they weren't just a passenger. Rather, they were pieces of interconnected stories looking for a way out. So, dear friend, keep in mind that there is always more than meets the eye. The next one. The disturbing idea that permeates our lives today is a tale in which music becomes the echo of who we are no longer, and the past returns to claim us in ways we could never have predicted. Have you ever wondered what would happen if you found a playlist called That Never Ends, where every song reveals the darkest secrets of your own existence? Imagine putting on your headphones and allowing yourself to be carried away by hypnotic melodies that, rather than providing entertainment, reveal pieces of your past lives. The story starts with a young man named Max, a music lover who, like many others, used streaming platforms to escape from the daily grind. I invite you to immerse yourself in this atmosphere of mystery and terror, which, despite appearing to be taken from a novel, is only a click away in the depths of the web. He stumbled one night when he was alone. Curious, he chose to disregard the cautions from unidentified sources and give the enigmatic playlist, the Infinite Playlist, a go. He was engrossed in an aural experience unlike any other when he pressed play. The first song began softly and melodiously, and he had an odd connection as he let himself be carried away by its melodies. The mood grew eerie as the playlist went on, but it seemed as though the song spoke to him on a deeper level than he even realized existed. Rather than feeling at ease, Max experienced a chill running down his spine. The song seemed to recount tales of misery and agony that he had not experienced. Yet each note he caught seemed to be his own. Reverberations of catastrophic accidents, tragic deaths, and the feeling of being present during those awful times. How could his emotions be so strongly influenced by a simple playlist? At that moment, he recognized that every song did, in fact, resonate with a part of his soul. A recollection of past lifetimes that were attempting to reach out to him and reveal horrors he had either forgotten or had never really experienced consciously. Max was disturbed and felt obliged to look into it more. His internet research revealed even more unsettling results. The Infinite Playlist wasn't just a straightforward compilation of tunes. There were rumors that people who listened to it started to lose their minds and that their lives fell apart as sinister relics from their past came to light. The playlist went viral in some dark corners of the internet, where it was said to contain clues about how each listener had died in previous lives. Some even claimed that they could hear their own voices muffled in the songs. Listeners report Ed having terrifying visions of their own deaths, moments when they felt the icy breath of death closing in on them, just as described in the song lyrics. They heard whispers beckoning them to a place where space and time were meaningless. Max felt more and more caught up in a vicious circle as he listened. He was engrossed in the music when he was unable to leave, and as he listened to each tune, he became aware of how his reality was warping in his despair. Max made the decision to examine the playlist more closely. One song in particular, a gloomy ballad called The Last Whisper, transported him to a bleak scene in his imagination through its words. In his dreams, he found himself in a dim alley, being chased by people who appeared determined to apprehend him. His own breath, raspy with dread, echoed in his ears. Desperate for answers, he was told by a kind voice that came out of the song that he needed to face his fears in order to break free from his past. Just as it appeared that the shadows were going to catch him, Max committed himself to learning the playlist's history. His hints brought him to blogs and forums that discussed an old artifact, a music player that had belonged to a popular medium, or a person who had communicated with the beyond. It was rumored that the gadget was cursed and had the power to use music to reunite you with your former incarnations. Max started to question if he should keep listening or whether he was just going crazy. But every time he attempted to leave, something inside of him made him go back to that never-ending playlist. It drew him towards inevitable fate like a siren song. He came across an even more terrifying truth when he ultimately decided to quit listening. His entire world started to fall apart. At night, everything in his house seemed to be vibrating in time with a melody that only he could hear. In the corners, shadows danced, hardly audible. The air was filled with whispers, and more troublingly, he started to get subliminal signals from the songs on the playlist. Each song disclosed a little fact about himself that he believed should be kept hidden. The distinction between fact and fiction became more and more hazy. His pals started to turn away from him. His family was worried about him, and he became so consumed by his pain that he turned to the echoes of his own life for solace. He discovered that every song he heard caused a piece of his soul to break free, a piece he was unable to retrieve. The songs connected him to his past, to both his joyful memories and the sinister secrets he had pushed from his mind. After days of suffering and insomnia, Max finally made the decision to confront his phobia. He sat in his room, his face barely lit by the weak light, and he pressed play again with resolve. He was not alone this time, though, as the opening chords reverberated in his soul like a lament, creating an imperceptible web that imprisoned him. He was committed to discovering the meaning behind the songs. The playlist went on, with each song serving as a portal to a different era, location, and life he had lived but was unable to recall. The images flowed like a torrent, showing him both happy and sad moments, broken hearts, and profound betrayals. Amid all of this, a shadow started to show up more frequently. It was a figure lurking, a sinister reminder that he had to face his fate. With each chord, the figure grew more real, until at the end of a song that seemed the darkest, Max realized that in order to escape the never-ending song, he needed to bravely face that shadow. He closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and let the music to prepare him to face his own history. He opened his eyes to find himself in a familiar yet unusual place, the alley he had seen in his visions, but it was now illuminated by an eerie light. The last song echoed in his head like a battle cry. Even though he was terrified, he knew he had to say something when the shadow appeared in front of him. "Who are you and why are you chasing me?" Max's voice wavered as the shadow grinned, and despite its lack of distinct features, he could feel it laughing at his anxiety. "I am the echo of your choices, what you chose to forget." It replied in an ethereal voice that resonated deep within him. It was the weight of his own decisions, the paths he had taken. Max realized he could not escape who he had been. He had to reconcile with all his past lives to break the cycle as the music reached its climax. Max felt transported, and in an instant, he saw himself in a different place there. Amid the shadows of the past, he understood that each death, each story of suffering, was merely a lesson he needed to learn. The shadow began to fade along with the melodies that had once tormented him. Finally, when everything calmed down, he could hear a silence he had never experienced, a silence filled with peace and liberation. Max had faced his fears, understood that music at times is not just a pleasure, but a journey deep into our psyche. When he emerged from the trance, he realized he had gained something invaluable, a connection to his true self, a freedom he had never imagined. As he looked at the screen of his device, the playlist had disappeared, leaving an echo in his heart. If you ever happen to find a playlist like Max's, be careful. Music can contain much more than it appears. I invite you to leave a like if you enjoyed this story, and don't forget to follow my channel for more chilling tales. Tell me in the comments what you thought of this experience. And if you have ever felt that music speaks for you, see you in the next story free.